I am Mark. I am smart. I look for Star Trek episodes that make me go. We look for things. We look for plot hole. Anyway, sorry. Welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for what is the name of this episode? The Samaritan Snare, which is episode 17 of season 2 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the second season episode, Samaritan Snare. So Samaritan Snare is the episode in which the Enterprise answers a distress call from a species called the Packlids. They send Geordi over to help, but then they soon find out that it's a trap, even though the Packlids appear to be very unintelligent and unhostile. They are very deceptive and like to steal from other species, and they hold LaForge captive in order to gain more technology. However, Riker, since they are not so bright, Riker comes up with a very simple plan to outwit them, which works, and they bring Geordi back safely. Meanwhile, Picard goes on the shuttlecraft ride with Wesley, where they bond a bit, but then he is in danger of dying from his artificial heart malfunctioning, and thankfully Pulaski shows up at the last second to save his life, because apparently she's the only one who can. So, I talked a bit about when I just recorded my revisited video for Q Who, which was the episode before this, which is just for my Patreon supporters. But I talked a bit about in that video how I hadn't really seen this episode very much, and I didn't remember it very well. So I was curious to see what I would think of it. If I recall correctly, when I was first watching TNG as a kid, this is one of the last episodes I saw, and I never really paid much attention to it. And that's the other thing, because there's all these season 2 episodes like Icarus Factor and this and a few other episodes that I don't remember, because I never really paid much attention to them. Like some other ones that aren't that good, like Outrageous Okana and Loud as a Whisper, I do remember them. Like, for some reason, I just saw them more often. Whereas these episodes that are more in the middle of the season, or Pen Pals, like these ones that are in the middle or towards the end of the season, for some reason, I just glossed over and just maybe didn't see when they first came out. It took me a while to see them. So this is one that, I just remembered the Packlids, of course. Everyone remembers the Packlids, but I couldn't remember any specifics of this episode. And I watched a bunch of reviews for this episode to get other people's thoughts on it, and a lot of people were extremely negative on this episode, which surprised me. I didn't realize it had a reputation of being such a bad episode. Now, not everyone. There were some people who liked it, but I definitely am not as negative on it. I wouldn't put this in some of the worst of season 2 the way I would with something like the Icarus Factor or Outrageous Okana, or or what else do we have towards the start of the season? I don't know. We have some bad ones, but we have some even worse ones coming up later in the season. But The Child, yeah, that's a bad one. But anyway, this episode was okay. Now, I can kind of understand why some people have issues with it, because Riker makes the wrong decision. He makes some dumb decisions But I actually don't think it's that. Like, I heard the argument that it was totally out of character for him, and that the Enterprise crew are acting like a bunch of morons. And I've heard several people saying that the Enterprise crew are being just as dumb as the Pakleds. They say it's idiots versus idiots, which I don't agree with that. I don't think that is unfair. I think that they maybe were not being as cautious as they should. But I don't know. I don't really see them being as idiots. But what's interesting, and something I didn't remember from this episode at all that I noticed, is that this is one of the rare cases where Worf is, like, correct. And I've heard other people say, oh, Worf is always right and they never listen to him. But he's usually not right. I'm sorry. I'm going through TNG and usually he's like wants to fire phasers at people for no good reason. Like, he's usually not right. I'm sorry. He's usually like, we should fire phasers or we should do this. And usually it's, Picard or Riker being like, well, no, that actually is just going to make things worse. Like, why would you do that? And they're usually right. Picard and Riker are usually correct. It just so happens to be, in this one case, Worf is finally right. Because Riker sees, the Pakled ship, they seem like a bunch of idiots, and they seem like they're in help, and they're in need, and it's Starfleet, policy to help those in distress, which of course it should be. I think pretty much everyone's agreed on that if they see someone in distress, they should help them. I've just had detailed philosophical discussions about the Prime Directive and how some people think it's completely immoral that Starfleet doesn't help every single person they can, which I'm not sure if I agree with that. Like, one reviewer said that that it should be Starfleet's job to go around saving everyone in danger, which I don't think so. No, that's not their fucking job. Their job is to explore. It's not their job to be gods and save everyone in the galaxy. But regardless, if they see a ship in distress and all they got to do is help lend some repairs, absolutely the correct moral thing is to help them. So that's why I don't think Riker's stupid. Now, how he goes about it is more of what's disputed, because he wants to send LaForge by himself, no one else, over, and that's what Worf questions. He's like, do we really need to send our chief engineer? And to be fair, like, Worf didn't suggest a security escort. He should have. Worf should have been like, well, at least let me go with him. And if Riker would have been like, no, that's unnecessary, Worf, you're just over-bloating the situation, then that would be Riker's fault. But Worf actually didn't suggest that, so it's kind of Worf's fault. It's on you, Worf. But regardless, Worf was actually correct in the situation, because he was pointing out to Riker, we don't know anything about them. We know nothing about them. We're sending one person alone by himself who's in a very vulnerable situation, and Riker's very dismissive of Worf. He's like, look at them, they're a bunch of morons. What are they gonna do? Come on. But here's the thing. I know some people highly criticize Riker and saying he's being incompetent and he's being a moron here, but I don't think so. I don't agree. I can understand his viewpoint, because from a normal standpoint, this is the thing, because we're watching an episode on TV, a scripted episode, so we know something's going to go wrong, because something always goes wrong in a scripted episode, otherwise there's no drama. And so we have a skewed perspective. But if you look at it from a perspective of this normal functioning Starfleet ship, and this is just a mundane occurrence where they go around helping people all the time with no incidents, then I could see more from Riker's perspective of like, this is just another data ends in Y. There's some people need our help. We give them help. Don't always overthink things. Don't always, expect that everyone has bad intentions. Sometimes, a cigar is just a cigar, and usually it is. So I actually don't think Riker is stupid for not listening to Worf, but he was wrong. and that was definitely what played out, and I actually like that. I like that a lot, that Worf is, as I said, Worf is finally right. Like even a broken clock, as they say. But Worf is finally right that that Riker should have been more cautious. And I would have liked more of a "I told you so" from Worf. There was just one look, like when Troy first came on the bridge and was like, "What is Geordi doing over there? He's in danger. Bring him back right now." And Riker shoots Worf a look, and Worf's like, "But I fucking tell you." I would have liked a bit more from Worf. He doesn't need to be an arrogant prick. He doesn't need to be. He doesn't need to gloat. He doesn't need to be like, "Oh, did you see what you fucking did there? Maybe if you listen to me, then none of this situation would happen in the first place." But anyway, Worf suggested bringing the security team. He didn't suggest that. Come on, Worf, do the fucking job better. Anyway, so I was listening to an interview with the writer of this episode, and he was talking about the inspiration for it and how there was a series of, around this time the episode was being written in the late 80s, there was a series of carjackings in the Los Angeles area on the highways where people would pretend to be in distress and pretend to have a flat tire, so other people would pull over to try to help them, and as soon as the good Samaritans pulled over to help them, these people would then carjack their other car, and at gunpoint. And so it was all just a ruse. And so that was the inspiration for this. It was like, well, what if that happened in space? What if these people appeared to be helpful, helpless and just wanting help, and you're preying off of the good Samaritan nature of human beings. Which, don't even get me started in a whole debate of the nature of humanity, because I think the nature of humanity is altruistic, but that's again another and sometimes it's people prey off of that, but that's the Los Angeles area. You gotta be, I wouldn't do that in the Los Angeles area, but anyway. And apparently people learned quickly not to do that anymore, and so now that people are actually in distress, they're fucked and they don't get any help. Mind you, this is the days before cell phones, let alone the internet, so it's a bit different now. You can just call an Uber or whatever, or AAA, which I know they had AAA back then, but they didn't have cell phones. So how you got no phone, you got no way to call them. But anyway, you would still be dependent on a good Samaritan to help you. So it was different. But anyway, that's off topic. So that was I think that's an interesting way to look at this episode, and I think that actually makes sense that the Pakleds were actually, first of all, they were more smarter than they appeared to be, and I think, and that's the other thing, I've heard people complain about the Pakleds specifically, saying they don't buy them as an alien race. I do. It seems to me that their language center is less developed than their actual intelligence is. So in other words, the way they speak and the way they communicate makes them seem dumber than they actually are. And I totally buy that. Like, I think that makes total sense, because every alien race would develop differently, would focus more on certain aspects than others. And it just seems to me that the Pakleds were way less developed in the communication department, but more developed in other things that, for example, allowed them to be deceptive. Like, I've heard some other people trying to headcanon this to say, oh, it's just these Pakleds are stupid, the rest of the Pakleds are actually much smarter, which, no, I don't agree with that. I think that they just are less developed in their communication. So And I think that was Riker's problem, and that was the Enterprise's crew's problem, is because they were judging how intelligent this alien race was simply by how well that they were able to communicate. And I think that actually is a good story point, because that would be a mistake that most human beings make. I think that's how most human beings would judge other human beings, off of their ability to communicate. And even in real life, that can be deceptive. That cannot be the case. Sometimes some people are very terrible at communicating, but are actually super intelligent. And so, but people would fall into that trap and make that mistake. And so I could definitely see that being a case with Riker, which is again why I'm more sort of forgiving, and I don't think he's a moron for falling for this trap. I think it was the easy trap to make, and also why I do buy the Packlets as an alien race. Because this saying, we are smart, we look for things that make us go, but really, like, they were playing this deception the whole time. They knew that they were pretending to be helpless when in fact they weren't, and they pulled that off. They fooled Geordi, and then they were able to sort of negotiate, outsmart them and steal all this other stuff from other different races. So I think it actually makes, I think it tracks. I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, since I bring up the Packlets, I do have to talk about their appearances in Lower Decks. Now, first of all, the Packlets are mentioned in the episode Brothers. Apparently, they saved Lore. Lore is like wearing a Packlet uniform, so I kind of, they never say what happened, but I always assumed that he just killed the Packlets and took over the ship, because that's Lore, which is kind of dark, but that's Lore for you. But they never really said. And then we see them as, background characters on Deep Space Nine, just, wandering around the station a couple times. And I think they're mentioned several other times as well, but it's not until Lower Decks that they become important again. And I was watching some of the Lower Decks portrayal of them, and they're a bit different. I think they're almost a bit better at communicating in Lower Decks than they are in this episode. But they're definitely, not the sharpest tools in the shed, which is consistent. But of course, Lower Decks use them as an analogy for Trump supporters, which I didn't catch on to that until Mike McMahon actually specifically said that. And once he said that, I'm like, oh, of course, like, that's perfect. That is the perfect Star Trek aliens to use as an analogy for Trump supporters. That makes so much sense. And so that makes me want to go back and watch some of these Lower Deck portrayals of the Packlets. And that's actually quite brilliant, I think. And also they said that Packlets were kind of a perfect enemy to have for Lower Decks, because Lower Decks is all about the lesser ships, the lesser ensigns, and the lesser part of Starfleet, and so they would have the lesser enemies being the main enemies. But I think as I'm recording this now, season 4 Lower Decks just finished, in which the Packlets didn't appear at all, so I think they're veering away from the Packlets, which I think it's time to. Like, I actually like that. I think they overplayed the Packlets, and it's time to focus on different things. But I'm okay with the Packlets as an alien race. It is ultimately what I'm saying as a part of Star Trek canon, and I didn't have an issue with them the way that some other people apparently did. Now, I gotta talk about Sonia Gomez. Because I forgot to mention her in my original review for Q Who that I made years ago. And I just did a revisited for Q Who where I talked a lot about her, but that's only on Patreon, so I wanted to talk about her in one of my public videos. And how she only appears in 2 episodes, Q Who and this one. And as I mentioned in my revisited for Q Who, I really like this character. She was originally intended to be a recurring character and I think it was a mistake that they didn't. And I do think it was the writers just abandoning this idea. And she was also supposed to be a love interest for Geordi, which I think actually would have been way better than what they did do with LaForge. They kind of made him a creepy, lonely nerd, and that's something that LeVar Burton always hated. Even to this day, he hated what they did with LaForge in his love life. And had they had this character, who was actually a really well thought out character, like I said in my Q Who revisited, which I'll repeat here, I think she's better than Barclay. I think they should have went with her instead of Barclay. I know a lot of people love Barclay. I don't. I don't hate him like my sister hates Barclay, but I don't hate Barclay. But I never really bought him that much of a Starfleet officer. I think I buy Sonia Gomez a lot more, and I think she's a much more round-out character. Also, the other thing I would say, and this is something I've heard other writers or people who were attached with Star Trek, particularly at the time of Season 2 of early TNG, was that they, Star Trek is known for representation and representing, all these different cultures and human races, but there wasn't that big of a representation of Hispanic community, and so had they had Sonia Gomez, that would have went a long way in that direction. And in fact, we didn't really get like a Hispanic representation in Star Trek till like modern Trek, to like Rios and Picard. I mean, you have some minor characters. You had Munez in DS9, but he only appeared in 2 episodes, so that's no better than Sonia Gomez. And maybe there's some other ones I'm forgetting about, but nothing really, really major. And Chakotay doesn't count because even though the actor is Hispanic, the character is Native American, so that's different. But yeah, and so that's a huge population of the planet, the second most spoken language in the world, and hardly any representation in Star Trek. So that's actually is a big deal, and so I really wish that they would have made Sonia Gomez a main character. I think is one of the big missed opportunities of Trek. Now, I was wondering when I did my revisit for Q Who how much she appeared in this episode, because that's not something I remembered. I just knew that she was in this episode. And the answer is she's barely in it, unfortunately. She has this one scene where she's talking with LaForge and Wesley. They're walking down the corridors and hogging the entire corridor, where people have to like try to slip by them, like get by them. They're being quite rude. But anyway, so they're talking about, Wesley's incoming shuttle trip with Picard or whatever, and Gomez knows a lot about Picard. Apparently, he knows all of the interest in archaeology and everything, which hadn't really been established. It had only been mentioned in 1 episode so far, Contagion. So she was like very knowledgeable of Picard and trying to ease Wesley's mind. And then later, when LaForge was being held captive by the Packlets, she was kind of taking over engineering, which doesn't really track that she would be next in charge. But of course, she's the only other established character there, and she was there to help Data and Riker come up with a plan, execute their plan to save LaForge. But other than that, yeah, she didn't really have much to do in this episode. She didn't appear in it nearly as much as she did in Q Who. But still, yeah, I think it was a huge mistake not keeping her on. I think that would have been way better. Now, before I move away from the Packlets, I do have to talk more about Troy and the scene where she comes on and she's really upset and is like, Geordi's in danger. And maybe this might be the spot where Riker really fumbled the ball and really did not act appropriately, because he did take her kind of seriously. But Data had to remind Riker, it's like, our Betazoid counselor can have perceptions that's beyond their ability. And like, Data shouldn't have to remind Riker about that. Riker should know that better than anyone. So that was kind of a bad portrayal of Riker. But the fact that he didn't listen to her immediately and been like, now he did take note and he did like start to freak out a bit. And he's like, Jordy, just finish what you're doing, get the hell out of there. And Jordy's like, still being all, oh yeah, it's fine, whatever, I'm just hanging out here with my buds, we're good. And he was like, oh, the repairs are going to take longer than expected. And Riker's like, all right, fine, stay over there and do what you got to do. No, Riker, no. And then later, once Geordi is repairing more, Riker finally starts to lose his patience, and he's like, look, we can tow you to a starbase, I don't care, we just need our engineer back. But then LaForge is like, no, don't worry, I'm done anyway. And that's when, of course, they shoot him with the phaser several times and start holding him hostage. You know, and the first reaction that Riker has when Troy says, they don't want our help. The last thing they want is our help. And Riker's response, again, this is being kind of a moron here. His response is, well, our help is all they're going to get. No, but she's telling you they don't want it. She's telling you, and he keeps having this like attitude, like, what can they do? They're just a bunch of morons. Hey, maybe they can take LaForge hostage, which is exactly what they do. In fact, like, all right, so and they're helpless. And here's the thing: I saw this review, which I totally disagree with, that thought, oh, well, they should just, fire their phasers or whatever and instantly save LaForge. They can get the shields down in 30 seconds. And he pointed that out as a plot hole, that the fact they didn't do that, but he's objectively wrong. The Packlets can kill Geordi in less than 30 seconds. And Riker brings that up. And he's totally right. He's completely correct. If they attacked, did a full-out phaser fight on that Packlet ship, Geordi would be dead. Most likely, like the high percent, 90% chance, they would have effectively killed LaForge by doing that. And that was 100% correct. So Riker was 100% in the right by not taking action at that stage. But that only goes back to prove my point of Riker being so careless and stupid by being like, oh, what can they do? They have your only chief engineer surrounded. They can take him hostage and threaten to kill him, and there wouldn't be jack shit you could do about it. And that's exactly what they do. So, yeah, and if they'd listened to Worf, maybe brought some more people on, maybe some security officers perhaps, maybe even Worf himself could have went with him, then maybe things would be different. Worf would have been, if Worf was over there, like Geordi was totally like, oh, that's fine, and he had his back turned and, it was guts in the engines and whatnot, but Worf, if he was there, he would be standing there with his hand by his phaser the whole time, on the ready. Those Packlets would not be able to fuck with him. Sorry, Worf would kill all their asses. And so, yeah. So the whole issue was Riker was not taking it seriously enough. He should have listened to Worf. But once it was proven that Riker was dumb and they had LaForge hostage, at that stage Riker was actually being right by not attacking, because the overwhelming possibility is that LaForge, because the Packlets already shot LaForge with the phaser like 3 times. They made it very clear that on the slightest provocation they will kill him. Like, they made that crystal clear. So no, I was kind of appalled to hear that the reviewers say that oh, they're stupid for not attacking. No, they would be stupid to attack. They would effectively be killing LaForge if they attacked. And regardless, like 30 seconds is more than enough time for the Packlets to kill LaForge. More than enough time. Anyway, so then we had the scene where, Worf is like, they're discussing everything in the conference room, and Riker completely rules out giving them the codes for the computer, which is what they want. There's like this out of the question. We can't do that. And Worf is like, then force it must be. But again, so they could use force, and yes, they'd be putting LaForge's life at risk, but there's ways they could try to do it to minimize that risk. But instead, Riker comes up with a ruse, as he suggested. And I actually think this is Riker being smart. And I think that this makes a lot more sense than using force, especially considering the Pakleds aren't the brightest, tools in the shed. So, and that's the other criticism I heard about this episode, was that people don't buy that this ruse worked because they thought that the crew was being overtly, completely obvious about the fact that they were, doing a ruse. And some people criticized LaForge for taking too long to catch on to it. But LaForge, I'm sorry, give him a break, man. He's just been hit by a phaser 3 times. I give him a bit of levity for that. Like, if you're like suffering in pain, you're being held captive, you got hit by a phaser 3 times, it might take you a couple seconds to catch up to. In fact, like, I totally bought how he wasn't sure at first until once Data started like acting a bit weird. He's like, could instantly tell something was up. Like, Data doesn't normally talk like this. But as far as the Pakleds not catching on to it, I totally buy that. Now, if we're talking about another alien race like the Klingons or Romulans or whatnot, no, of course not. They would catch on immediately. But come on. The Pakleds? You think the Pakleds are going to be able to distinguish from the normal way that the Enterprise crew talks, when the way they talk is, we look for things. We look for things that make us go. He is smart. Like, of course not. Of course the Pakleds aren't going to know. Like, I know I said earlier that the Pakleds are smarter than they pretend to be, but I also said that the communication skills are less developed and lower than their intelligence. And this is exactly what the Enterprise crew is relying on, communication. Of course, that's going to fly way over the heads of the Pakleds. Like, I think it would be bad writing if the Pakleds did catch on to what the Enterprise crew was doing, because I think it's very clear from the way they're established that they're far too stupid, I'm sorry, but maybe I should say less developed in the communication department to catch on to the nuance, especially I think, and I honestly don't think they're being that obvious about it, particularly when you consider it's the freaking Pakleds they're dealing with, because they slip in like their codes in, like Worf saying, "You will die with dishonor." And Geordi's like, "Oh, thanks a lot, Worf." And it's like, "You will never reach the 24th level of enlightenment." Like, of course I'm sorry. Of course that's going to go over the Pakleds' head. I completely 100% buy that. Like, there's no way they would pick that up. Where you make things go. Like, how are they going to pick up nuance like that? They're not going to. I'm sorry. They're just not. But anyway, but then the ruse itself was kind of like the problem I have with the ruse itself is that they were trusting LaForge too much in that situation. I think that maybe got too quick, because LaForge was like, "Oh, we gotta wait till the countdown to fire the phasers," and they're like, "No, we should fire now." And LaForge is like, "No, they're gonna get us. We gotta wait till the countdown's done." In that case, I think they should have been smart enough to tell that he was deceiving them. To be fair. That the case is that I'm a little iffy on the actual execution of the ruse. But overall, I'm okay with it. And yeah, so that was... I'm okay with it. Like, I don't seem to have as big of a problem with it as some other people do. And overall, like, I like the analogy to, Samaritans, people doing the right thing, but then getting conned or trapped and then being in a situation. I think I do buy that. But anyway, let's talk about the Picard and Wesley plot for a bit. Now, the first thing I have to bring up with this is that Picard is being portrayed as a completely grumpy curmudgeon in this episode. Now, that's not to say that he was never portrayed as a grumpy curmudgeon before this, but he had seemed to grow out of that. That seemed to be an early season 1 trait that they were slowly pulling him away from. But now all of a sudden he's like in full locked 100% curmudgeon mode. And I even heard someone speculate that this was a first season script that got pushed to the second season. But I think from everything I saw, that's actually not the case. But I could see that perception because he's acting like early season 1 Picard all of a sudden, and it seems jarring and out of character. Now, granted, in season 2, he's still a little bit of a curmudgeon. They didn't totally correct his character yet, as they will do in season 3 and 4. I'm thinking of episodes like Times Squared and Pen Pals, where he's kind of Pen Pals, he's kind of off and on. He has that one scene where Data brings the little girl on the bridge, and he's like, "You see that? You see that?" But for the rest of the episode, he's actually, riding horses and having casual conversations with Data and relating to him. And Times Squared, that's an extreme circumstance, so I can kind of excuse his extreme standoffish behavior. But in this episode, it seems unwarranted. The way that he's behaving, and I think they're trying to play it off like he's just really grumpy for the fact that he doesn't want to damage his image by being shown as fallible, and so doesn't want Pulaski to do this surgery and wants to just be obtuse and pretend that he doesn't need the surgery and has to be yelled at and talked into going to the starbase, and he hates it, and so he's grumpy the whole time. But I think the problem I have is I don't buy that premise. I don't buy that he would be so stupid and obtuse to not realize his life is at danger and they're just trying to save his life, and being that concerned about his image. I understand he needs to be somewhat concerned about his image, but really, I think he is being dumb by not letting Pulaski operate. Whenever someone approaches it, the subject, when Wesley asked him point blank, why don't you just have Pulaski operate? He freaks the fuck out, and he's like, "You don't understand. That can't happen." Oh! He gets so angry about it, and I don't buy that. And they never really fully explain exactly what his issue with Pulaski in specific is. Why is he so deadpan against her operating on him? And it seems to be more than simply he doesn't want the crew to know, because there's ways he could have done it in secret. In fact, him going to a starbase makes it a bit more overt that something's going on. In fact, I also don't buy his reaction to Riker when he tells Riker he needs to get a starbase, and Picard doesn't share anything with him. He's like, "None of your fucking business, Riker. Leave me alone." And Riker even goes to the ready room. He's like, "This is very unusual behavior. Why? Can you just tell me what's going on?" And he's like, "Oh, it has to do with my image. Let's leave it at that." That's more confusing. That doesn't really explain anything. It would have actually been better for him to say something like, "It's a personal matter, Riker, and let's leave it at that." That actually would have been better. That would have made more sense. And Riker would be like, "Okay, so it has nothing to do with ship's business. It's just a personal thing." Okay, that's fine. But saying it image was just more confusing than anything else. So... yeah, and so, it sets up this, sitcom-ish situation where Wesley is worried about going on the shuttlecraft with Picard for a long trip, and Gomez and LaForge are trying to be like, oh, it'll be fine, and then Picard comes by and acts like grumpy as all fuck, and LaForge, is trying to be polite and says something like, oh, it's a nice day to go on a trip, and Picard just grunts and walks off. Like, again, it's like a sitcom-ish thing. I see why they're doing it for, like, laughs or whatever, but it doesn't actually fit with his character, and it portrays him as way more of a curmudgeon than he's been. And then during the shuttle ride itself, and Wesley is trying to like talk to him, he's like reading his book, and he even he's being grumpy as fuck, and then he goes and sits in the back to try to ignore Wesley, and Wesley doesn't take the hint and keeps bugging him. Like, I don't know. I just don't buy any of that. And I just don't understand why he's so resistant to getting the medical help he needs. Like, now the one thing that I did like about this whole thing, these scenes, was when he finally did open up to Wesley, which honestly I think he should have done from the beginning. I think you got some really good interactions between the two of them. And particularly he tells the story of how he got stabbed in the heart, which of course would be revisited in the episode Tapestry, one of the best episodes of the show, and later in season 6. Again, I watched an interview with the writer of this episode, and he was sort of explaining the motivation for coming up with this backstory. And it mainly had to do with making clear that Picard was not perfect. And he was saying how it was a very important thing for any writer of any movie or show to a lot of traps that amateur writers fall into is making their heroes perfect. And that everyone should have Achilles heel or get out of the way or flaw. And so they were giving Picard this flawed backstory, which I think actually did really enhance his character, and something that they did, which is why they ran with it in season 6 and did such a great story with it, because it's an interesting concept to have a dynamic character who... so it was a great addition. It was a great sort of interaction between Wesley. I kind of get a kick out of the way Picard sounds so British as he's telling this story. He's like, I was hanging out and with my lads over in Starfleet, and got in a fight with these Nausicaans, and one had me pinned down in this kind of lock hold, and unbeknownst to me, one of his chums snuck up behind me with his chums. Like, he just sounds so like proper, so British as he's telling the story of a bar fight. I don't know. That's one of his chums. I don't know. That was just funny. A funny way to describe it. But he didn't mention Domjot. I was like, the whole time I was listening, I was like, is it going to bring up Domjot? Human played Domjot. But no, apparently that's something. He didn't even mention his friends. Come on, you got to mention your friend. Well, he mentioned he was there with his friends, but he didn't mention them as part of the bar fight. He made it sound like he took on 3 Nausicaans by himself. In fact, I think he specifically said that, which is not what happened in Tapestry. His friends, they just got their asses kicked very early on, and he ended up being the last one standing. But they all got into the fight together. Come on, Picard, tell the story right. And don't leave out Domjot. Human played Domjot. But what I did like how he said, I made some questionable statements about the Nausicaans' parentage, which I don't think they had in Tapestry. I don't remember him saying something about his parentage, which I would have liked to have seen. Maybe I'm wrong. It's been a while since I've seen that episode. But anyway, so I like that scene. So I like the connection between Picard and Wesley. But then once they got to the starbase, it turned into like a very, very like pulpy medical drama. Like with the surgeons being like, "Oh, this is gonna be fine. He's in good health. This is gonna be easy." He knows something's gonna go wrong, and then something goes wrong. And he's like, "Oh my god, I can't fix it." And this other guy comes in and is like, "I need you to do this." It's like, "I'm not qualified to do it." And it's like, "I know someone who is." And then next thing you know, Pulaski's there. That's stupid. I'm sorry. That is so dumb. That is so cheeseball. That is so cheesy, and I don't buy that Pulaski is the only doctor in the fucking galaxy who is able to do this procedure. She's the chief medical officer on the starship. You gotta be like a jack of all trades. They never said that she specifically specialized in artificial hearts. That's just plot contrivance. And I hated how when he woke up, he's like, "What the hell are you doing here?" I'm like, I still don't get what he had, why he hates Pulaski. Like, none of this was earned. It seemed like out of nowhere, and I just don't like. I didn't like any of it. I thought it was dumb. And then when Picard walks on the bridge after he, is saved from this incident, and everyone starts clapping, he's like, "I beg your pardon." Like, again, he's 1,000% curmudgeon there, and it just irritates me. And why would they clap too? Like, they should realize that they know that Picard wouldn't be on board with it. Even if Picard didn't flip out over it, it's still like, he's not going to respond positively to that. So why are you going to do it? I don't know. The whole thing just seemed really sloppily written and dumb to me. And also, one thing I do have to really, really bring up, I don't get as hung up on this as some people do. Some people get really hung up on the technical side of things. But I did notice it, and it does annoy me. The shuttle that Picard and Wesley were taking to go to the starbase, they described it many times as not being warp capable. Which really doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I think this is before. I think later, and if you look at the technical manuals and stuff that came out around season 4 and 5, they made it very clear that every shuttle was warp capable, and it would have to be. Otherwise, they would be totally fucking useless. Because I think some of these writers didn't understand like how slow subwarp speeds are. It's like something that you only do if you're like orbiting a planet or something, or maybe traveling within a solar system or something like that. Like that. And then one person laid this out, and I don't know if it's true, but it sounds true to me, that the time it takes a shuttle at sub-warp speeds to travel to the starbase, Enterprise could have went there in 30 seconds at warp 7. Like, and that tracks. And so it doesn't make any sense. Like, if all you have to say, though, and this is why I say I didn't get too hung up over this, but really all you got to say is the shuttle has warp. It's traveling at warp 5, warp 6. I think other shuttles and later incarnations of Star Trek were shown going at warp 6. Nothing wrong with that. Like, and I think that actually tracks to have a shuttle go at warp 6. But I guess this is before they really established that, and they weren't thinking about travel times. And as I said, like in the grand scheme of things, it isn't that big of a deal. But yeah, it does annoy me, and I did notice it. Anyway. I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. This helped me continue with the channel. I'm very humbled and very thankful for all of your support. So I'll just give a quick shout out to Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro, Miguel Acio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neil Howells. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we have a couple of Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Greg Marley, who says, "I never bought that Picard would be so vain or insecure that he'd be afraid of his trusted senior officers knowing he needed an operation. It's much easier to see him confiding to the bridge staff and delivering a little lecture about how we all have medical needs and that openness is okay and we should never be so arrogant as to present a false image of invincibility, etc. Still, this episode is a guilty pleasure of mine. It amuses me how dumb and simplistic the pack lids are, and I like watching Geordi try to deal with them on their level and then trick them so obviously. Riker basically runs the Enterprise into a ditch 2 seconds after getting command, and I love how he tells Geordi on the viewer right in front of the pack lids that Deanna is concerned he's in danger. Anyway, it's all in service to the needs of the plot. They actually do that a lot, I've noticed in the first 2 seasons, where they'll say something that's meant to be like an aside, but they'll say it right in front of whoever they're talking to on the view screen. It's like they can hear you, you know that. It's apparently they don't think that. They think there's some sort of privacy block or whatever. But anyway. Next comment is from Ricky, who says, this is a decent episode. Now that we have Lower Decks, I actually have grown to appreciate the episode, knowing what great comic relief they are to Lower Decks. Although the actual B plot with them was a bit dull and boring, but it had its moments. As for the main story, I find it hard to buy that Picard didn't tell his senior staff of his condition. To me, that felt stupid. But as for the scenes with Wesley and Picard, they were alright. They did flesh out Picard's character and the interactions were quite good, as this will play a huge role for the amazing episode Tapestry. So overall, a decent episode, not a standout, so my rating is a 7 out of 10. Personally, and maybe I'm wrong, but I would actually call the pack lids the A plot, and the Picard stuff going on the B plot. The Picard stuff seemed like a very, like a side note, like a very sort of let's do this thing in the background. But maybe I'm wrong. But that's, and that's also splitting hairs. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, I always liked the pack lids, even before Lower Decks. I thought I liked their use in this episode. I think they definitely, like, this episode would not be as good without, if the pack lids weren't as good or as memorable as they are. So, my rating for Samaritan Snare out of 10 is going to be a 5 average. I was torn between a 5 and a 6. I almost went with a 6, but I think the cheesiness of the Picard medical drama and the reason why he's acting like 1,000% curmudgeon is what brought it slightly down to a 5 for me. And, also, of course, Riker not listening to Worf and and being not listening to Troy, more importantly, and being a little bit stupid in this situation. But I don't think this episode is as bad as some other people are saying that it is. As I said, I totally buy the pack lids. I think the concept of them getting conned by people they think are stupid is actually an interesting concept, and I buy the ruse that they use to get out of it. I think that makes sense. Well, most of it anyway. And I like some of the character interactions between Wesley and Picard. I think that was done kind of well. So I think this is really an average episode. Average is a good way to put it. It's fine. It's nowhere near as terrible as some of these other episodes in season 2. But yeah, it's okay. So anyway, that is it for my review of Samaritan Snare. So coming up next on my channel, let's see, this coming Monday, I do have a terrible episode to review, and that is Up the Long Ladder, which will be public on my channel. And then Wednesday, I'll be back over on Patreon for a revisited video, revisited for Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, which we'll be doing for my Patreon supporters on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, another terrible episode to review. Manhunt will be public on my channel, and then Saturday finally get to a decent episode with The Emissary, not to be confused with just Emissary. Anyway, so that will be Saturday on my channel, so be sure to check out my channel for many more Next Generation episode reviews, and I cover, of course, a lot of other videos on Star Trek and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.